Hello, everybody, and welcome to Dishing with Stephanie's Dish, the podcast where we talk to people obsessed with food, and we do talk to a lot of cookbook authors, and I feel pretty honored today. I feel like, a living legend, not only in the vegetarian category, but vegan category, and also a fellow soup lover, which is so exciting. Good morning, Nava. How are you? Welcome to the show,
Good.
Nava Atlas.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here, and I'll tell you why in a moment.
Okay, so let us talk because you have Vegetariana was one of your first books, which
It was
is
my first.
okay, and it is a hoot. It has like these hand-drawn illustrations, little bits of wisdom throughout. It is really a well done book, and it was reissued in the last couple of years and
Yeah.
made all completely vegan. Did you go vegan later in life, or tell me about that transition?
Um, it was exactly, I would say 20. I go by my son's age because he was 10 when he went vegan, and now he's 32. So it's always easy for me to keep track. So yeah, 22 years vegan. I was vegetarian since high school. So I was kind of an early adopter, not
Yeah.
necessarily on the veganism side of it, but I remember even in being a weirdo as a vegetarian back then. And also, I was going to say that, I've really seen this whole progression from analog to digital and, wanting to familiarize myself with you, your work, your podcast. I went straight to, and of course, I'm going to forget, oh, John Kung.
Yeah.
And he was talking about Detroit. And I was so thrilled because I grew up right outside Detroit.
My radio partner grew up outside Detroit too, and I love Detroit. I visited and had like 4 very memorable days in my life.
It is an amazing city and it's an amazing transformation. The last time I was there was not that long ago. It was maybe a year ago, June.
Sure.
And my friend was showing me around central downtown. And then I saw an article, I'm not sure if it was the New York Times or elsewhere, that this city is the new Paris. And I said, uh-oh. And it was Detroit. And then
That's,
I read another statistic that says that downtown Detroit is actually safer than San Francisco.
oh, I believe that.
Yeah.
I absolutely believe that.
Yeah.
It is a really cool place to visit. The farmers market alone was just mind-blowing to me. So many just sheds upon sheds of makers. And I've always loved maker culture and people that make products. And I have podcasts about that too. And really just enjoy the craft of people making food and how hard they have to work and how delicious it is.
And so many vegan restaurants, for me, that's really my interest. And one that had started when I was in college in Ann Arbor, I am a University of Michigan graduate, was Seva. And now they have that beautiful place in downtown Detroit that is delicious. It is, expensive on a par with New York, still very much worth it. But I'm really glad to see the city thriving because the city has been through so much.
Yeah,
And I have to admit, I did not get to Eastern Market on my last visit because I also really wanted to save some time to go to Ann Arbor, my alma mater, and see how I hadn't been to Ann Arbor for a longer time and how that has transformed. It looks like a little city now. And then Royal Oak looks like Ann Arbor did when I went to
sure.
school there.
It's funny.
So
Yeah. So veganism, I, I will say, so I do eat meat. And I knew people that were vegans and I knew it was a thing. And obviously, being in the food world, you're paying attention to trends. And obviously, eating plant-based is super beneficial health-wise. And then I started working on my TV show, and my executive producer is vegan. And I just really felt like I had my eyes opened to what it really means to like live a vegan lifestyle. And for her, she's been doing it like you for so long. It's just like, oh, I just don't eat meat. It's really no big deal at all. And we are so fortunate now in that we have so many choices and so many options in our food world. Writing a cookbook that's vegan specific to soup, I thought was probably not as hard as people think because a lot of soups are vegan if you're using a vegetable broth.
Right, they're vegan. So many soups are vegan already, and soup is a very plant-forward type of food, maybe second only to salad.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of how I think about soup because I make a lot of soup, but I also make a lot because I cook a lot. So I have all of the vegetable scraps and the broths and the little dribs and drabs of things that I'm always throwing into a soup. When you put your cookbook together, was it hard for you to think about like, okay, what recipes am I going to put in? What am I not?
So this book, like Vegetariana, has a long history. What you're holding in your hands now is the fifth edition.
I've
So
heard, yeah.
yeah. So I think I published it. I had an agent back then, not the same one I have now, and she said, "Oh, publishers are saying this is just too niche. It's too specific. Couldn't find a publisher." So I thought, you know what? I'll publish it myself. And at the time, it was actually so many more people are self-publishing now, but it was easier back then. Like a lot of things, um, it was a very small, really diminutive hand drawn book, and it did very well. So once I had proved myself, it was picked up by Little Brown. Then it went out of print at Little Brown. I went back to self-publishing it. That same editor went to Random House, so she picked it up again, and then it went out of print. None of the editions before this one had as many photographs, and they weren't designed as beautifully as I would have liked. So it was really nice to get the whole process back into my hands.
The book is really beautiful. So did you publish this version yourself?
This one I did because, after the fourth edition, it's the likelihood of another publisher publishing something that's been in and out of print so many times is probably close to nil. Even though it has sold lots of copies, people want to move on to the new thing, to the fresh thing, and it's understandable.
I'm pretty impressed by that. Not only that you're in your fifth edition, but as a cookbook writer myself who does publish the more traditional route, you're probably financially, it's a much better um, amount of money per book that you make probably publishing yourself than going through a publishing house.
Um, I was going to say maybe per book for the copies that you're lucky to sell, but you're really at a disadvantage from the perspective of distribution. That's a big thing.
Yep.
I have a good distributor, but I felt like, I just want a beautiful edition of this book before I leave this mortal coil. But as far as making lots of money, no, I would say to your listeners, that's not the way to get rich.
Yeah, no, I just see, I
Yeah.
think about it from the perspective of like, okay, a traditional book, the author probably makes anywhere from $3 to $7 a copy.
Oh, less than that.
Okay. And
Yeah.
then a published book that you publish yourself, people say that you can make anywhere from $15 to $22 a copy.
Oh, maybe connect me with those people. I'd like to see where they got that information. Because,
Okay.
you're not doing huge printing, so your per unit cost is not great.
Right.
And also, I didn't want to print overseas because, that's another thing in itself. Then the books have to be printed way ahead of time. And
Yes.
so I did it domestically, which I think they did a beautiful job.
It is beautiful.
But the per unit cost is going to be a little bit more. But this was a labor of love, I
Yeah.
would say, to get it into print in a fashion that I'm really happy with. Because I do, like you, I absolutely love soup. I think that I would say it's my very favorite category of food and eating. It's so digestible. And like I said, with the title, Soups and Stews for All Seasons, you make them every time of year. People think of it fall, winter, but I love a cold summer soup. There's
Yeah.
nothing more refreshing for dinner than, when it's a warm evening like the summer we've had this past summer, to have a really delicious cold soup.
And like gazpacho can be revelatory, right?
Absolutely. And a lot of these soups also, I would say in my summer chapter, about half of them are no cook. So that's great for those times where you feel like you just don't want to turn on a single burner. Like watermelon gazpacho is one of my newer favorites.
I did not see that in there. I'll have to look back. That sounds really interesting to me. Chilled soup is always a little, I don't get there. I get there when it's really hot. I just don't
Yeah.
think about it unless it's super hot.
I have a few that are good hot or cold. Like one that I made not long ago. It's called Tangy Cold Potato Spinach Soup, and
I
that's good.
literally just opened to that
Oh
page.
yeah, that's really good hot or cold. That could be had in the fall, nice and warm or hot. And then the next one also cold creamy leek and potato soup, because you do think of leeks as a little bit more of a fall or spring vegetable. And I would say sometimes I don't even pay attention to the chapters. If I feel like having a winter soup in the summer, I'll do that, or vice versa. Well, I wouldn't have a cold summer soup in the winter, but reverse, yes.
Yeah, same. I was just at my cabin. It was 80 degrees and I made chicken broccoli soup because I just was hungry for it.
Yeah.
Let's talk
Why
about
not?
some of the stews. And it feels like there's some global influences kind of in here, some Thai influences, perhaps some African influences. How do you get your ideas for recipes?
Well, if it's globally influenced, I'm influenced by what I have when I go out to eat. And if I go out to eat, I like to have things that I haven't had at home or don't normally make at home. But then it's so much fun to try to recreate it in your own kitchen. And now, supermarkets are a veritable feast of international ingredients, which is great. One of my favorites, my absolute favorite, what I call my favorite food hacks, because I'm really lazy when it comes to Indian cuisine,
Mm-hmm.
is simmer sauce.
Mm-hmm.
Indian. Have you ever tried any of those?
Yeah, I
Amazing.
have. Yep.
They are amazing. They really taste anything you put them on tastes like it came from the best Indian restaurant because I am just simply too lazy to do the grinding 20 spices. And
Yeah, for
that's
sure.
what you need to you get those complex flavors. It's not just about dumping some curry powder into something. So that has been really wonderful. And then in the last couple of years, I would say I've really fallen in love with kimchi,
Yes, me
learning
too.
about just how good it is for us. So the
And you
kimchi,
have to get past the idea, like it smells, right? When you open that first jar
when
or
you
you open,
first do,
you're
yeah,
just sort of like, ugh, it's just got that really heavily fermented smell. But then when you use it, it doesn't taste like it smells at all.
it definitely mellows. And there are two types of kimchi. There is a kimchi made with fish sauce, and I'm just guessing that might have more of the aroma.
Yep.
And so I get the vegan kimchi. And again, I have a kimchi soup here, and the list might look a little longer. I'm not a big fan of huge, long ingredient lists, by the way.
Yep.
A little bit longer than my usual, but it's still so easy. And it's one of those soups that's on the table in 30 minutes.
And which one is it?
The kimchi soup on page
Okay.
63.
All right. I'm
Yeah.
just gonna take a look at that while we're sitting here too. All right. And then stews, was that purposeful to include stews, or is that just because soups kind of are like stews too?
I have always called stews soups with a chunkier texture and a little more attitude.
Okay. That's a good way to describe it. I like it.
Right. So I have here this Italian mixed vegetable stew with the gnocchi, and the gnocchi tend to absorb a little bit more of the broth, so it becomes more stew-like. And then I think in one of the later chapters, I have a Thai vegetable stew with a peanut base. They're just so adaptable. You can, if you don't like stew-like textures, you just put a little bit more liquid or water and you're back to a soup.
When I was looking at this easy laksa soup, the Southeast Asian influence there, I'm going to be going to Southeast Asia in January.
Oh,
And I've
really? Where
never
are you
been,
going?
and
Oh, wow.
there's so many delicious soups in their culture.
Absolutely. In fact, my nieces and nephews were just telling me a story that they were in, I believe it was Thailand, and they said by the end of their visit, they didn't want to see another noodle again.
Yep, there are a lot of noodles in Thailand for
Yeah.
sure.
I don't think I would ever tire of that though.
How did you get started in cookbook writing?
That is a very interesting story. In high school, like I said, I was kind of the oddball vegetarian, both at school and in my family. Don't really remember what gave me that notion other than, I just never liked meat. My mom did this kind of bland Eastern European cooking. And I don't know, I think I was a little bit early for the hippie era, but I was kind of a wannabe. So I decided to go vegetarian. And my mom said, well, I'm not going to cook two meals. If you want to be a vegetarian, you're going to have to cook for yourself, thinking that that would put an end to it.
Yeah.
But I really took to it. I really enjoyed it. And back then, we didn't have these beautiful supermarkets or Whole Foods, or we had these dusty health food
Oh,
stores.
I remember.
Yeah. Where it was probably 70% vitamins and potions and maybe
Yep.
a little bit, and then brown things that you'd buy by the pound.
Yes.
But I just loved it. So I bought the brown lentils and the brown oat groats and whatnot that we had. And I had so much fun with it. Then when I got married rather early on in life, my husband really wanted to be a vegetarian, but he was absolutely no cook. Still isn't. Can make a good salad, but that's his limit. So we would go out once in a while. We lived in New York City at the time, and I'd like to recreate things at home or just concoct. And he said, you really need to write this one down. You need to write this one down. And I would write this one down. And after a while, I found myself with a lot of recipes. I was never trained as a chef. In fact, sometimes people introduce me as a chef, and I say, that's very nice of you, but it's an insult to chefs.
Yeah, I feel similarly. I'm just a home
Right.
cook.
Right, exactly. I was a trained graphic designer and illustrator. And in fact, the book you're holding, one of them, Vegetariana, I designed and illustrated, and the design and the illustrations are very similar, identical, really almost identical to the original edition, but with some additional new illustrations that I did. This was what I called my COVID project. When we were inside for 2 years, I did a lot of new illustrations for it. And that's when I veganized it. So,
It's a super lovely book. It's different than any other cookbook because it has just so much personality, but yet the recipes look super delicious too. It's like every page, I feel like I turn it and it's a new discovery.
oh, thank you. And I always call it the kind of cookbook that you can read in bed because there's a
Yeah,
lot of stories and folklore and food lore and food history, which also kind of fascinates me. How I started writing was I did accumulate a lot of recipes. We were a starving artist couple in New York City back then. I remember going to a lecture by some well-known graphic designer whose name, of course, I no longer remember, but he said, if you're a freelancer, unless you do something for yourself that's completely your own, you're going to be just going from job to job to job. And I thought, that really resonated. So I thought, why
hmm
don't I try to put this together as a book? And back then, everything was analog. There was just phones. In fact, there was only landlines. And I was so shy. It was really a miracle that I was able to be a freelance illustrator and graphic designer because back then the way to do it was to cold call and make an appointment with the art director and schlep the literal huge portfolio. So I had to make what I thought was a proposal and make a copy of it and send it off to, and I sent it to one publisher. And they kept it for 6 months before saying no. And at that point, again, I read about how the publishing process worked. I was completely naive. And it said, you've got to find an agent. I thought, "Oh, how am I, one of the shyest people on earth, going to find an agent?" So my husband actually took my really rough proposal to a copy shop across from where our studio was, our art studio. And the guy behind the counter said, "Oh, what is this? It looks really interesting." And my husband told him, he said, "Oh, my girlfriend is an agent." So he gave me her number, but of course I had to call them on a landline with my hand and my voice shaking. And they said, "Well, you can, mail it or you can drop it off, but we're not looking right now and it could take several weeks or several months." And I said to my husband, "I can't do this. Can you take it up?" They were also in New York City. "Can you take it up there for me?" So he did, and he came back and he said, "Oh, they weren't very nice, and they had a dog and he was barking at me." And I said, "Well, this doesn't sound good." Well, the very next morning, my landline was ringing. And they said, "Oh, we love this and we want to represent it." And I think within a few weeks, they'd sold it to one of the top cookbook editors in New York City. But honestly, I was just too young and too dumb to really appreciate what, synchronicity, luck, maybe some talent, of course. We have to own that about ourselves as
Yep.
women, but I didn't believe it at the time. And it was, the rest, as they say, is history.
It really, what a great story. I love hearing that because anybody in the publishing world, finding an agent is just like finding a needle in a haystack, and then getting the book bought by the publisher is another needle. And even, if you have good publishers, some people have bad experiences. The publishing industry has changed since COVID. It's just changed so dramatically.
Yes, I mean, there has always been, I would say, we always think everything back then was better. Not necessarily. You see in Vegetariana, the drawings are very delicate
Yeah.
and white. Well, when I first saw my book in print, I cried, but not from happiness. They had inked the drawings so heavily and that some of the pages were actually sticking together. So
Oh,
it was an epic nightmare. But they corrected everything for the second printing, and the book was actually very successful. And it led me to my second. And then I thought, well, this is a great way for a starving artist to make money.
yeah.
And I was very dedicated at the time to vegetarianism, as much as right now I'm even more dedicated to veganism for many, many reasons. But what you say is right. I feel like, and I can't give the name on the air, but I've been so blessed with my agent.
Mhm.
And it is, again, sometimes it's a matter of luck or timing and persistence. Persistence is a very important ingredient.
And I love this story about you putting yourself out there because we're in this kind of weird age. And I'm I like the where we're at, but it's different in that now so many people that are getting, six-figure advanced cookbook deals are influencers or have a huge following on social media. And what I find more often than not, many of them are great, but also the skill sets that you need to be a good social media influencer are not necessarily the same skill sets that you need to be a good cookbook author. So you can do great hands videos and five ingredients or less or things that are super trendy, but can you put that into a whole narrative, into a cookbook, and does that translate? I think the publishers now just look like how many social media followers do they have? Are they on TikTok? Are they doing these videos? And that's kind of how you get the deal. I hope that we still can have some of the other types of books that are more labor of loves and are single themed or are unique and different in that way. And I'm worried we might lose some of that and it's all going to come about a personality.
Yeah, all of what you say is 100% correct. And in fact, when I was listening to your podcast with John Kong, and he was
Yeah.
saying he has 2 million followers on TikTok. Well, I have 0 followers on TikTok because I'm not on TikTok, and I have nothing against it. In fact, I think it's great. I think when people can kind of build their own
Yeah.
platform, it's just wonderful. But aside from doing cookbooks, I'm also a writer, a nonfiction writer. I run 2 websites, and I feel like there's just so many hours in a day and just so many skill sets and hats that one person can wear.
Yeah. And some of the fast, quick hand photography or videography, or even just like doing videos on YouTube. Thank God for me, because as a home cook, I don't know, I don't have good knife skills. I am really just like your next door neighbor that's cooking you food and has a reasonably funny personality, but that's about all I got. So it's fun to be able to make a career with those skills, but
Yes.
I do understand that, there are people like the Ina Gartens of the world who we need to make room for them too, because even though maybe, she has a lot of people on TikTok and all that now, but in the days she didn't, and her books are really well researched and really well put together. It's kind of an exciting time, but it's also a time where there's a lot for a lot of different types of people and young people too. Like I mean, my daughter's 25 and she's really into cooking, but she cooks things I would never cook. Like she will make her own bagels. I would no more near make my own bagel and boil it. And I just, that's not really what I do, but I'm so impressed that she does it. She'll do the 4-day project cooking, the making the steamed bao buns and just doing all kinds of fun stuff.
That's wonderful, though. My daughter has become a really good seitan maker. Are you
Oh
familiar?
yeah.
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 And it's my recipe and I've really refined it, but I thought sometimes it just feels like such a project to me. I'm so glad that she likes to do it.
Yeah.
It's very useful.
So is
And
your whole family vegan and vegetarian?
I would say, yes. In fact, we went vegan at the same time. My husband has kind of gone in and out of having eggs. So when he has eggs, he's a vegetarian. But both of my kids were raised vegetarian. Neither of them, and they are not young anymore, neither of them have ever tasted meat in their life.
Oh, that's so funny. I can't even imagine that because we just eat so much beef in the Midwest. What I will say, this producer that I was talking to you about that's vegan, she started raising chickens and she had all these eggs and eventually she started eating the eggs and then she ended up getting rid of the chickens, so she's off the eggs again. But it was interesting to hear like how she came to even incorporating eggs into her life. She was just like, I have all these eggs. I hate the waste.
Right. And when you have chickens, they're going to lay eggs.
Yeah.
So, I have a friend who raises backyard chickens and she's giving them usually a lot of times to my husband. And it's nice to know that they're eggs that are raised humanely,
Yeah.
where they come from and everything.
If you had to say a favorite recipe for you in the vegan soups and stews book, you kind of already said the one. I just before we wrap up, is there a book or is there a recipe that feels really personal to you or something that you feel like is a signature just of yours?
I just opened to one, the mock chicken noodle soup. So chicken noodle soup with CHICK''N. And
Yes.
subtitle is kind of like my mom's, but without the bird. So this
So
uses
how did you get that flavor without the bird?
well, I use vegetable or vegan chicken style bouillon cubes.
Hmm.
And then the vegan chicken product also, they usually have their own flavor. And it's really not that difficult. I feel like this is proof positive that pretty much anything can be veganized. And I'm going back to the beginning of the program saying that I really didn't like my mom's cooking very much, but yet I loved my mom. So this soup reminds me not so much of my mom's cooking that I didn't particularly like, but of my mom.
Yeah.
So even looking at it and the way it looks is just brings me back to my childhood. And I think that's so much of what eating is about, and so much of what comfort food is about is that nostalgia and that comfort of our parents or our family and the safety. And I feel like that is just such a universal human need. I always think that we're not necessarily alike as humans, but I think that we all want the same things. We
Hmm.
want love, security, our family, and food is just such a way to bring people together.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And boy, that's a great way to end it. I love that you shared that story. And I was just, that we're just coming off of the Republican National Convention, and I've been feeling a little bit like trying to be open-minded, but also feeling a little tribal in my belief system. And I do think about getting back to what are people wanting? When you really get down to it, we do want a lot of the same things. We come at it from
Absolutely.
different points of view, but it helps me to have empathy and understanding when I'm having a hard time feeling like, who are these people?
I'm glad you said it, not me, but I get it.
And yeah,
Totally
and on
get it.
both sides, really. I mean, I'm from Minneapolis, and believe me, we have a lot of real left stuff happening right now. And on the one hand, some of it's really exciting, and on the other hand, I just feel like it's too much, and you feel like you're kind of pulled on all sides and not sure where the real understanding is. And I'm just trying to find my own personal empathetic path as we
Absolutely.
get walking up to this election, regardless of what happens. So,
Find a way to meet in the middle and
yeah.
things that we all have as commonalities.
And it is always food and soup, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I think food really brings us together for sure.
Nava, this has been such a delight. Thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
spending a little time with me today. I appreciate it. and we'll get the podcast edited and posted. It is Vegetariana. That is the original book, A Rich Harvest of Wit Lore and Recipes. And the new book, that's not new, but in its fifth edition, but new with pretty pictures, Vegan Soups and Stews for All Seasons, Nava Atlas. Thanks for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. If I could just, one more thing is that people can visit me is at theveganatlas.com.
Okay, I think I went to your website once, so I'll put that in the show notes.
Oh, thank you so much.
Okay, great to meet you. All
Bye-bye.
right,
Thank
bye-bye.
you.